The Thing from 1982 is the best horror film of the 1980s, but with the worst cast. Wait, hold on, calm down. I will explain why. Just keep watching, please. America has been under assault by ice and snow for the last week and a half, and The Thing has been inducted into the National Film Registry, so what better time to look at this 80s classic? Now, firstly, I don't consider The Shining an 80s film. It came out in 1980, so they filmed everything in 1979. Predator and Aliens are both primarily action and sci-fi, so they do not count either. John Carpenter, director of Halloween, created a staple of horror and sci-fi film. It was not well received when it came out, however. Positive sci-fi was the name of the game, with Star Wars being so prevalent and E.T. coming out the same year. The original was beloved and much more sanitized, having come out in 1951, so the insane, grotesque visual effects were off-putting. But it gained a cult following after its release on home video and television, now being considered one of the best horror films of all time. It is almost a given that a piece of art will not be appreciated in its time. The original The Thing is actually a remake itself of the 1951 film, The Thing from Another World. This in turn adapted the 1938 novella Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. The Thing from 2011 is technically a prequel to the 1982 film. The 1951 film is more of a loose adaptation, with the creature being a humanoid, almost vampiric creature. He also has seed pods that can launch from his body to create more of his kind. The Air Force plays a factor, with a journalist visiting looking for a story. But the flying saucer is still present, as is the thermite from the book and 1982 film. Now, the remake / prequel, whatever you want to call it, is a piece of hot trash. Just straight booty cheeks. The only thing I like about this movie is this cool underground cavern. Otherwise, its very existence violates one of the great principles of horror. Don't show the shark. It is so much more unsettling and disturbing not knowing exactly what happened to the Norwegians in the original, just seeing them fly in the helicopter, having escaped this horror, trying to end it by shooting this dog. They also tried to do the blood test scene, and no surprise, it sucks. The producers claim they did not want to do a straight-up remake because it would be like, quote, drawing a mustache on the Mona Lisa. How can you be that prescient, but then make this garbage? Ironically, these two films serve as a how-to manual on an effective one-location horror film and a lame one-location horror film. Although it's really not one location, because they kind of expand it. And even when they expand it, it's still boring. Also, they should have called it Before the Thing, rather than The Thing. Anyway, since the mid-1970s, The Thing was in production, going through a myriad of writers and directors who all had different visions for the story. Tobe Hooper, of Texas Chainsaw Massacre fame, was under contract for Universal, so he was initially chosen to direct it. But they were not satisfied with his concepts for it. The project stalled out with Alien in 1979 revitalizing interest in it. Carpenter, however, was reluctant to make the film because he did not feel he could surpass the original. I love that he was like, I'm not doing it if I can't do it better. But he read the novella and saw how he could make it relevant to his time. Filming, once it got underway, was done on a mix of refrigerated sets in LA and on location in the frigid climates of Juneau and British Columbia. Of the $15 million budget, $1.5 million was used for the effects. And man, it paid off. These effects still look incredible today. Computer effects have their place and practical effects cannot achieve some things. Certain shots of the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, for example, could really only have been done with CGI. Otherwise, the impact would have been lessened. But the tangibility, texture, and physical presence of practical effects have an impact like no other. Knowing these were real, physical things and actors were interacting with it makes it so much more scary. It ages so much better as well. Now, I love the title card evoking the creature stuck in ice. The UFO flying to Earth is definitely the worst looking effect in the film, but it has a real charm to it with the aesthetic of a 1950s serial, and the effects only get better anyway. And I looked it up, and apparently they were not inspired by The Thing opening. The studio just wanted to establish that there was like a threat. Now, this opening is amazing for two reasons. One, there's no dialogue. It sets the pace well and forces you to pay attention. And two, the opening immediately creates intrigue, and it drops you into the middle of the conflict without the audience realizing it yet. After this, Kurt Russell's character introduction, playing chess against the computer, is very smart because it foreshadows his isolation throughout the film. I've always considered Kurt Russell the poor man's Patrick Swayze, and I don't think he's really that great in the film. I like him in a lot of other stuff, but he just never seems that afraid in this movie. Soon after, we find out that the Norwegians in the helicopter from the beginning were trying to stop the dog from getting away because it was already infected with the thing. So they were not trying to harm the dog, they were trying to harm the alien creature. There are excellent shots of the dog just watching everything that are very unsettling once you understand what is happening. An unknown predator sitting among them, burning out the clock until he strikes. The dog pen scene is an amazing, primal way to introduce the alien. The dogs are freaking out, and seeing a dog freak out is just very eerie to me. The guys bust in, kill the dog, which is very ballsy. I love dogs, but the extent to which people freak out when dogs are harmed in movies is a little ridiculous. Once they find the UFO in the ice, the gravity of the situation really sets in. The scale and otherworldliness of it is unsettling and amazing. The subsequent conversation around what they found and the aliens overall is very, very entertaining, and it feels like a conversation a bunch of guys would have about aliens. And it's a great example of developing the plot while fleshing out the characters' beliefs. And I love the Chariots of the Gods line. A scientist discovering the reality of the situation through data popping up on his computer seems like an innocuous, boring way to show it. It is innocuous, but this is why it is so smart. How many disasters in real life have been discovered by a guy just running data? The quiet makes the information sink in all the more. It reminds me a little bit of the opening of Monsters vs. Aliens. The famous blood test scene is a great way to move the characters out of a gridlock and keep the story going. The ending is incredibly haunting and very, very eerie. It's a great example of how to do an ambiguous ending well. Often writers use ambiguity as an excuse to avoid writing something interesting, but not so here. It sticks with you, and you find yourself reanalyzing the rest of the film for clues as to whether Childs or MacReady are infected in the last scene.
That is an exercise in human paranoia and what people go through to get to that place. And then when your paranoia turns rampant with the added problem of reality, of it being true, that your paranoia has come true, what sort of disaster that means to the human being. And in this particular story, 12 guys begin to mistrust and distrust and be so leery of each other that they're barely able to function. And the reason for that is because we've got one great monster.
The cast do a decent job, but I've never been sold or moved by any of their performances. It's interesting to see a very young Keith Davids, but the rest of them are just kind of there. I think I'd be freaking out way more if an alien was impersonating my comrades, and I had no idea who to trust. The film has always suffered the criticism of the characters not being well realized, and I would have to agree with that point. It's not that any of them are bad in the film, but the performances could have had more bite and nuance to them. Also, your comrades are slowly getting infected and turning on you. That wouldn't get you more riled up. The performances would not be as big of a deal if the film had a bigger scale and more flash to it. But when you are right in the characters' faces the entire time, you just need stronger acting. However, the actors do a serviceable job, and there is so much more to the thing than the performances. Visuals like the frozen blood falling from the wrist and the burning man in the falling snow at night are incredible and striking, two of my favorite shots. The use of fade-outs is great, denoting time while keeping the pace moving. The Thing is the definition of a slow burn, and they use reveals really well, presented in this underplayed manner to keep things interesting and maintain the amazing tension throughout. The characters don't even have safety in numbers. The dialogue is very minimalistic and real. I don't know where else to put this, but I love when people...
pure nonsense.
And you gotta love good pyrotechnics. A film set entirely in one location could easily have been boring, but they create such a claustrophobic atmosphere, driving the tension up even more. The lighting casts everything in either an eerie glow or a cold, uninviting sheen. The music just gets under your skin, and you feel so cold the entire time. The entire film is so captivating, and it draws me in every time I see it. The visuals, the sound design, and the way the story unfolds are all incredible. Ultimately, what makes The Thing so unforgettable is that the horror lies in the unknown, disguising itself in the familiar. The familiar becomes dangerous. Those two elements are the source of all horror. That's why the dark and the uncanny valley are so unsettling. The film effectively keeps you off balance, never knowing exactly where the alien is or who it infected. It stays ahead of the audience, and that's what every film should do. You can make judgments on MacReady for killing people he wasn't certain were dangerous, but you can't know how you would react until the thing is staring you dead in the face.